My name is Bethany Hart. I'm 32, and I never thought I would become the kind of woman who keeps receipts like weapons. I never thought I would sit in my own kitchen and feel like I was standing in a courtroom. But that was before my mother reached into my life the way she always did, like my boundaries were suggestions, and my money was a family utility bill. It started with a number that didn't feel real until she said it out loud. $14,000. That Thursday, I came home from work ready to grab something to eat and let the day fall off my shoulders. My mom was already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, wearing the expression she used when she thought she'd just solved a crisis no one else could handle. Without any buildup, she told me she had taken all the money from my safe, $14,000. She didn't say it like a confession. She said it like an announcement, like I should applaud her. She explained it the way she explained everything she did to me. It was for the family. She'd used the entire sum to pay off my brother's car loan because he'd been missing payments, and she didn't want his credit destroyed. Then she looked at me and said I should be grateful she had the initiative to help our family. I stared at her teacup, and I swear I could hear the wall clock ticking louder. The safe had been my pride. I bought it myself, fireproof and locked with a code only I knew. The cash inside wasn't just savings from my job. It was side hustle money, tools I'd sold, and even a few old collectibles I traded for cash. Every bill had its own little story, and 5,000 of it wasn't even mine. A month earlier, my uncle, Raymond, had given me that amount in cash, asking me to hold it for him until a deal he was working on went through. He was specific. Keep it safe. Keep it quiet. No one needs to know. He said it like secrecy was the lock, not the metal box in my closet. I didn't ask questions because in my family, questions are treated like accusations, and I was tired of being punished for wanting clarity. So when my mom sat there acting like she'd done something noble, I didn't blow up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even ask how she did it, because the answer would be worse than the theft itself. I just nodded once and said, "Understood." She took that as acceptance. I could see it in her shoulders, the way they loosened. She thought I'd let it slide the way I'd let everything slide for years, borrowing a few hundred from my dresser, taking my car without asking, even giving away some of my things to relatives she decided needed them more. I told myself it was easier to let it go than start a war over it. But nothing prepared me for this one. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. My uncle's name lit up the screen. My mom's eyes flicked toward it and then away, like if she didn't look, the call wouldn't be real. I answered, and his voice was direct. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't soften it. He wanted to know where his money was. Not my money, his. The way he said it made it clear he already suspected something was wrong. I glanced at my mom while answering. She froze, her hands wrapped tight around her teacup. As soon as I said the cash was gone, the color drained from her face. She had clearly forgotten that not all of it was mine. For a few seconds, the kitchen went silent except for that ticking clock and the small sound of my own breath. Then I ended the call, walked over to her, and leaned in close so only she could hear me. I whispered one short sentence, just enough to remind her she hadn't just crossed me, she'd crossed him. Her hands trembled. She knew what that meant. My uncle didn't handle losses through family talks or polite apologies. He handled them the way men like him always did, through pressure that made you feel like the walls were closing in. 2 minutes later, her phone lit up with his name. She didn't answer. She just stared at it like it was a snake on the table. 8 minutes after that, there was a knock at the front door. Sharp, deliberate, nothing like a neighbor dropping by. I opened it. Standing there wasn't my uncle. It was his attorney. And that's when I realized the real storm was just about to start. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Early 40s, sharp suit, eyes that scanned the room like he was cataloging every detail for later. He introduced himself as my uncle's attorney, but he didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he handed me a business card so crisp it looked like it had just come from the printer, then asked where my mother was. I stepped aside. He walked in without hesitation, like he already knew the layout of the place. My mom was still at the kitchen table, tea gone cold, fingers curled around the cup like it was the only thing keeping her steady. He stopped in front of her and set a slim folder on the table. The sound it made was small but deliberate, the kind of sound that tells you the person holding it knows exactly what they're doing. Without sitting down, he opened it and began reading. Dates, amounts, specific bills, even serial numbers. My uncle had kept an exact record of the cash he'd given me. It was all in there, neat as a bank ledger. I didn't know he tracked it like that. To me, it was just an envelope of money he wanted kept safe. To him, it was an asset under tight surveillance. The attorney read without pausing, then looked up and asked a simple question. Where was the money now? My mom tried to soften it. She said it had gone toward a pressing family matter, the kind of vague phrase she'd used my whole life whenever she wanted to end a conversation before it began. The attorney didn't even blink. He said my uncle wasn't interested in what she considered pressing. The arrangement had been clear. The money stayed untouched until he called for it. She shifted tactics. She leaned back, trying to sound casual, suggesting that surely family could work this out without dragging in lawyers. The attorney didn't smile. He didn't look away. He said plainly this wasn't about family. It was about property that had been taken without consent. And then he used the word theft. That word changed the air in the room. My mom's head turned toward me like I was the one who had made things escalate. Her eyes narrowed just a little, the way they did when she was looking for someone else to carry the blame. The attorney didn't give her the chance. He reached into the folder and slid a document across the table. It was a formal demand for repayment. $5,000 plus a penalty for the delay, due within 72 hours. If it wasn't met, he said, my uncle would have no choice but to escalate the matter. She stared at the paper, then at him, then back at the paper. The silence stretched so long I could hear the refrigerator hum. Finally, she asked what escalate meant. He didn't elaborate. He just closed the folder, put it back under his arm, and walked to the door. When it clicked shut behind him, the house felt smaller. My mom didn't look at me. She just sat there with the demand in front of her, muttering words I couldn't catch. But I knew the signs. She wasn't planning to pay him back. She was already thinking of ways to twist this to make it my responsibility. So my uncle's anger landed on me instead of her. And that was the moment I understood something about my own life that I'd refused to admit for years. My mother didn't just take money. She took narratives. She stole the truth, rewrote it, and handed it back to the family in a shape that made her look like the hero and me look like the problem. That night, my boyfriend, Daniel, called. He could hear it in my voice before I said a word. Bethany, he told me, this isn't normal. His steadiness made me want to cry and laugh at the same time, because it was so simple, and my family had spent my whole life training me to accept the unacceptable. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. I just said, something happened with money, and he went quiet in a way that felt protective, like he was already calculating how to stand between me and whatever was coming. I hung up and looked at my mother across the kitchen. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. She wasn't ashamed. She was working, building her version before I had the chance to tell mine. I didn't say a word, but I'd seen enough of her tactics over the years to know one thing. She was about to make her move, and when she did, it would be aimed directly at me. The next morning, the house felt wrong. Not just quiet, but the kind of quiet where you can tell conversations have already happened without you. My mom moved around the kitchen like I wasn't there, putting dishes away a little too loudly, scrolling through her phone with this fixed expression. Not angry, not nervous, just busy. I knew what that meant. She was working, not the kind of work that earns a paycheck, the kind where she builds her version of a story before you have the chance to tell yours. By 9, my phone rang. It was my Uncle Raymond. He didn't even start with hello. His voice was tight, measured, like he was trying to sound reasonable but couldn't keep the edge out. He said he talked to my mom, and just like that, I knew exactly how my day was going to go. According to him, the problem wasn't that my mom had taken the money. The problem was that I had failed to safeguard it. That's how he put it. Like I was some incompetent guard who had fallen asleep on the job. He said my mom had explained that she'd been forced to use the cash because I hadn't been clear about what portion belonged to him. That was a nice little twist. He was the one who insisted I keep the whole thing quiet. No one else needed to know it was his exact words. But now that detail had been erased like it never existed. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't bother defending myself. I just let him talk, storing away every word. He said he was trying to be fair, but couldn't ignore the fact that in his view I'd mishandled things. Then came the part I'd been waiting for. He said he and my mom had agreed it was better to handle this between us rather than making it into something bigger. That was code. We're going to corner you into taking the blame. When the call ended, I stared at my screen for a long moment. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Not fear, not exactly. It was that familiar mixture of anger and clarity. The part of me that used to beg for their approval had gone quiet. In its place was something colder, something that didn't want to scream, something that wanted to win. By lunchtime, it was clear they'd been busy. My cousin Sadie called just to check in. Her tone was sweet enough, but her questions weren't innocent. She asked if I'd found the missing money yet, and if I regretted not telling anyone it was Uncle Raymond's. That's when I knew she'd already been briefed, just enough to think she was getting the truth. Then Aunt Maya left a voicemail saying she hoped I'd learn from this and that family comes first. Another cousin texted me asking if I'd sorted things out with Mom yet. None of them were asking because they wanted to hear my side. They were calling to reinforce the version they'd already been told. By the end of the day, I counted 6 calls, 3 texts, and 1 Facebook message from a relative I barely spoke to, all with the same undertone. We've heard the story, and it's your fault. I didn't correct them. Not yet. If there's one thing I've learned from dealing with my family, it's that sometimes you get more power by letting people believe they've got you cornered. They relax. They start making mistakes. They talk too much. And when you've got people like my mom and my uncle who thrive on controlling the narrative, you wait until they've told it so many times they can't backpedal when you dismantle it in front of everyone. That night, I opened my laptop and started building my file. My uncle's text from when he gave me the cash, the handwritten note he left in the envelope, a time-stamped photo of the safe taken the day before my mom emptied it, even the receipt from when I bought the safe because I knew she'd eventually claim it wasn't secure. I wasn't going to defend myself in whispers. I was going to wait until the right moment with the right audience and drop everything in one shot. When Daniel called, his voice was low and steady, like he didn't want to spook me. "How bad is it?" he asked. "It's not just the money," I said. The words came out before I could soften them. "They're already making me the villain." There was a pause, and then I heard him exhale. "Bethany, you can't let them do that. Not again. Not again." He didn't even know how many times again had happened. He knew pieces. Little fragments I'd let slip during late-night talks. A story about my mom borrowing a few hundred here. A story about my brother being rescued from consequences while I got told to be understanding. But Daniel hadn't lived inside my family's machinery. He hadn't watched them turn truth into a weapon and call it love. "I'm not letting them," I told him. "I'm just waiting." "For what?" "For them to get comfortable." He didn't like that. I could hear it in the silence. Daniel was the kind of man who wanted to step in, stand in front of me, take the hit so I wouldn't have to. Part of me wanted to let him. That part was tired. That part wanted a normal life where your mother didn't steal from you and your uncle didn't send lawyers to your door. But another part of me knew something Daniel didn't. In my family, if you swing too early, they call you unstable, they call you dramatic. They make you the problem, and the actual betrayal disappears behind your reaction. "I have proof," I said. "Let me do this my way." He hesitated, then said, "Okay, but I'm not leaving you alone in it." That should have comforted me. It did, for a second, until I remembered his ex-girlfriend, Chloe. Chloe was a name I tried not to think about. Not because Daniel still loved her. He didn't. He'd been clear about that from the beginning. Chloe was a chapter he closed years ago. But she had a way of lingering at the edges of things, popping up at parties, commenting on photos, sending the kind of messages that looked harmless if you didn't know how to read between the lines. And my mom was excellent at reading between the lines. My mom was excellent at finding the soft spots in any relationship and pressing until something bruised. That night, as I was adding files to my folder and making backups to the cloud, my phone buzzed with a notification. A message request from a number I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the name attached to it. Chloe. It was short, sweet on the surface. "Hey, Bethany, I heard you've been dealing with some family stuff. Just wanted to say I hope you're okay." My stomach tightened, because the message didn't just feel like concern, it felt like timing. I didn't reply. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I took a screenshot and dropped it into my folder, right alongside the receipts and the evidence and the notes that proved my mother had stolen the wrong money from the wrong person. The next morning, my mom acted like nothing was happening. She asked if I wanted eggs. She said she might go see my brother later. She moved through the house like she wasn't sitting on a ticking 72-hour deadline from a lawyer, and that was the scariest part. Because when my mom gets calm, it means she already has a plan. And when my mom has a plan, someone always bleeds. Saturday morning, my mom called like nothing was wrong. Her voice had that light, almost cheerful tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. She said there was going to be a family dinner at Aunt Lillian's place and that everyone would be there. She added, "It'll be good for us to clear the air." Clear the air. I'd grown up in this family long enough to know what those words really meant. A staged ambush. Get as many people in the room as possible, control the narrative, and make sure I was outnumbered before I ever opened my mouth. It was never about resolution, it was about pressure. I told her I'd come. I didn't hesitate. If they wanted an audience, I wasn't going to deny them one. The rest of the day, I prepared like I was walking into court. The file I'd been building lived on my phone, my laptop, and the cloud. I printed hard copies too. 3 pages per set, clean, organized. Impossible to misinterpret. If my family had taught me anything, it was that you never rely on a single version of the truth to survive. Daniel watched me from the kitchen doorway while I slid the papers into my bag. He didn't try to stop me. He just asked, "Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" "I'm sure," I said. And I was. What I didn't say was that I was tired of being afraid of rooms filled with people who shared my last name. When we arrived, the smell of roast chicken and baked potatoes hit me before the tension did. Aunt Lillian's house always looked warm. Soft lighting, framed family photos lining the walls. But the air felt tight, like everyone had already decided how the night was going to end. Conversations dipped when I walked into the dining room. Not full silence, just enough of a pause to let me know I was the reason. My Uncle Raymond was seated at the far end of the table, my mom right next to him. They looked comfortable, almost smug, like two people walking into a situation they thought was already won. Dinner started with small talk, work, weather, who'd gotten engaged recently. It was the kind of talk where people keep glancing at you, waiting. Forks clinked against plates. Laughter came a beat too late. Halfway through the meal, the shift came. My uncle set his fork down, cleared his throat, and looked around the table like a man preparing to deliver a speech. He began slowly, carefully, making sure each person followed along. He said there'd been a misunderstanding involving money he'd entrusted to me. His version was neat, rehearsed. He gave me a large sum. I failed to keep it secure. My mom had to step in to resolve the crisis. At the right moments, my mom added her own commentary. How I hadn't been clear about ownership. How she made a difficult decision to protect the family. How unfortunate it was that things had become complicated. It was a duet, polished and practiced. I let them talk. I watched them relax as they spoke, confidence growing with every nod they got from around the table. The longer they went, the more certain I became that they were doing my work for me. Because once people commit to a lie out loud, it's harder for them to pretend later that they misunderstood. When my uncle finally leaned back satisfied, I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I said I wanted to add a few details. Then I reached into my bag. The first stack of papers went to my cousin Sadie, then to Aunt Lillian, then around the table, one set at a time, 3 pages each. I waited until everyone had them before I said another word. Page 1 was a screenshot of my uncle's text telling me to keep the money secret. Page 2 was a time-stamped photo of my safe, sealed and intact, taken the day before my mom emptied it. Page 3 was the handwritten note my uncle left inside the envelope when he gave me the cash. The room went quiet in a way that felt different from before. Not tense, focused. The sound of pages turning was louder than any argument could have been. I laid out the actual timeline. No dramatics, no commentary, just dates and facts. I finished, then sat back and waited. That's when something happened I hadn't planned for. Aunt Lillian leaned forward, squinting at the handwritten note. She said she recognized the handwriting, not just because it was my uncle's, but because she'd received a nearly identical envelope from him the year before. Same phrasing, same instructions. Keep it safe. Tell no one. At first, I thought she was joking. Then I saw my cousin Sadie's expression change. She said she'd gotten an envelope too, months ago. She hadn't told anyone because she assumed it was a one-time thing. In less than a minute, the spotlight moved. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at my uncle. The room shifted fast. Questions replaced judgment. Suspicion replaced certainty. My uncle tried to laugh it off, calling it just how he did things, but his voice wasn't steady. My mom jumped in to defend him, saying the situations were different. The more she talked, the worse it sounded, because it was becoming obvious she hadn't just stolen money from me. She'd been helping him keep these little arrangements going. I didn't push it. I didn't need to. The room was already doing the work for me. As the evening wound down, I caught my uncle watching me. It wasn't embarrassment in his eyes, it was calculation. And in that moment, I knew something important. This wasn't over. If anything, the real fight was just beginning. The quiet after that dinner didn't mean peace. It meant regrouping. I'd seen it before. When people like my mother and my uncle lose in public, they don't apologize. They retreat. They rework the angles. They come back quieter, smarter, and more deliberate. The silence lasted exactly 2 days. On Tuesday morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was a guy I used to work with years ago. We hadn't spoken in months, so his casual tone felt forced. He said he'd heard I might be looking to sell off some of my tools and equipment because I was going through money trouble. I told him no. Then I asked where he'd heard that. He hesitated, then said my uncle mentioned it at the diner the day before, just in passing, like concern. I hung up and sat there staring at the wall. That wasn't help, it was bait. My uncle wasn't trying to move my stuff. He was planting seeds, making me sound desperate, careless, the kind of person who couldn't be trusted with money. If enough people repeated it, it would start to feel like truth. By that afternoon, there was another sign. My landlord texted me saying he'd gotten a strange phone call. The person claimed to be handling a family legal matter and wanted to verify whether I was behind on rent or storing large amounts of cash in my apartment. They wouldn't give a name. They wouldn't say who they represented. My landlord didn't give them anything, but I didn't need a name to know who it was. That vague authority, that just official enough tone, that was my uncle's style. Wednesday morning, my mom showed up at my door unannounced. She was holding a grocery bag and wearing that concerned expression she used whenever she wanted to look generous in someone else's story. She said she'd heard I might lose my job soon and wanted to make sure I had food. I asked her where she heard that. She changed the subject. I let her put the groceries away because I already knew the play. Within a week, she'd be telling relatives she was helping me through a rough patch, reinforcing the idea that I was unstable and needed rescuing. She wasn't here to help me. She was here to document herself helping me. The move that caught me off guard came the next night. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end said he was from a local collections agency. He told me I had an overdue account in my name for $3,200. I told him I'd never taken out that account. He read off an address I hadn't lived at in years. My mom's old house. The account had been opened 3 months earlier. The date of birth on file was mine, but off by 2 days. The signature was a shaky version of my own, close enough to cause a problem, not close enough to be clean. I asked him to send me copies of everything. When the email came through, my hands went cold. That was when it clicked. They weren't just gossiping anymore, they were building paper trails. This wasn't about family reputation now. This was character assassination in slow motion. A fake debt here, a rumor there, a few concerned calls to people who knew me. Nothing big enough to trigger police attention on its own. But stacked together, it painted a picture of someone unreliable, financially reckless, and quietly spiraling. They were smart, and they were patient. That night, I called a friend I'd known since high school. He worked in cybersecurity now. I told him about the fake account and asked if he could look into it. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't vent. I just laid out the facts. A few hours later, he called me back. His voice had changed. He'd traced the IP address used to open the fraudulent account. It led back to a personal email address tied to my uncle. The same address had been exchanging encrypted messages with my mom's account for weeks. It wasn't subtle. It was reckless. If I wanted, I could have taken everything I had straight to law enforcement and ended it there. Clean, official, permanent. But as I sat there looking at the evidence, I realized something about the people I was dealing with. Police reports don't scare people like my mom and my uncle. Public exposure does. Reputation does. The way people look at you when they realize they've been lied to for years does. And the perfect stage was already set. Aunt Lillian's birthday was coming up in 2 weeks. Everyone would be there. They'd assume I'd keep my head down to avoid ruining a celebration. They'd think the pressure had worked. They had no idea I was done playing defense. This time I wasn't just bringing receipts. I was bringing the whole ledger. Aunt Lillian's birthday fell on a Saturday. By the time I arrived, the house was already full. Cousins crowded the couch. Uncles hovered near the kitchen. Kids ran through the hallway like nothing in the world could touch them. My mom and my uncle were already there, standing side by side near the buffet table, laughing with a small group like nothing had ever happened. They didn't even look at me when I walked in. That was fine. They wouldn't be smiling for long. The first hour passed easily. Cake, presents. polite conversations that stayed safely shallow. But I noticed how my mom and my uncle worked the room separately, leaning in close to different relatives, voices low, expressions serious. They were still shaping the story, still assuming I'd stay quiet to avoid making a scene. After dinner, Aunt Lillian insisted everyone gather in the living room for coffee. That was my moment. I pulled a small folder from my bag and set it on the coffee table. The room went still in that subtle way people get when they sense something is about to happen. I said I had something important to share and that it wouldn't take long. My uncle leaned back, crossing his arms. My mom gave me the tight smile she used when she thought I was about to embarrass myself. I started with the money. Calm, precise. I explained exactly what happened with my uncle's $5,000. The text messages telling me to keep it secret. The time-stamped photo of the safe. The handwritten note. I passed the copies around so everyone could see for themselves. Then I moved to what came next. The rumors about me selling equipment. The call to my landlord. The fake debt account tied to my mom's old address. Each item came with proof. Call logs, emails, documents. I let the silence sit, just long enough for the weight of it to settle. Then I handed out the last page. The IP trace report my friend had prepared. It showed the fraudulent account had been created from an email address directly linked to my uncle, which had been in regular encrypted contact with my mom. That was when the room changed. My uncle opened his mouth to speak, but Aunt Lillian cut him off. She asked him why his personal financial issues involved creating fake debts in my name. My mom tried to say she had nothing to do with it, but my cousin Sadie pointed out that the account was tied to her address. The questions came fast after that, from every side. For once, my mom didn't have answers ready. My uncle's voice got louder, but the more he defended himself, the more desperate he sounded. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't need one. The proof had already done its job. By the time I left, my mom and my uncle were sitting together in the corner, isolated, not speaking to each other, not speaking to anyone. In the weeks that followed, the calls stopped. No more rumors, no more strange phone inquiries, no more surprise visits wrapped in concern. I made it clear that if they came at me again, I wouldn't keep it in the family. And this time the audience wouldn't be limited to a living room. Life got quieter after that, almost eerily so. My mom kept her distance. My uncle avoided me completely. The family moved on, or at least pretended to. Then, one Wednesday evening, I got an email from my friend in cybersecurity. He said he'd been reviewing some older flagged data and found something I might want to see. It was another set of encrypted emails between my uncle and my mom, dated months before the $14,000 ever disappeared. They weren't talking about my money. They were talking about consolidating cash from other relatives, mentioning specific amounts, schedules, even where people kept their safes. One line from my mom stopped me cold. Bethany is predictable. She won't make a scene until she's ready to drop proof. That's when I understood. The money wasn't a mistake. It wasn't impulsive. It was part of a pattern. I wasn't the first target. I was just the first one to push back hard enough to stop it. I saved everything. Every email. Every attachment. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because now I didn't need to scramble if they slipped again. I already had the case waiting. So I stayed quiet. I let them believe the storm had passed. They don't know the real storm hasn't even started.